SMU football back on the practice field this week after scrimmaging on Saturday, and the Mustangs didn't waste any time on Tuesday getting to it as they worked into team period as we were allowed in practice. And the biggest difference came for SMU on Tuesday in fall camp. There are a million black jerseys out there now, and that is because the scout team is now situated and beginning work on Nevada prep. So that is what is coming. We are just almost to game week where SMU will face Nevada at in Reno Saturday, August 24th. Little night game action, and we're getting our last look at the Mustangs before fall camp breaks on Wednesday. They're going to go indoor. They're going to do practice, and then from there, everything's closed the rest of the week to media. And that will allow the Mustangs to maybe get in another scrimmage. I'm not sure. Rhett Lashley does talk on Wednesday, so we'll have that full coverage for you at ontheponyexpress.com. But we're winding down fall camp. And for SMU, it has been quite the run of fall camp. Some really interesting storylines. We are going to do another premium podcast on Wednesday and drop that for our members on our YouTube channel. You just need to go to the homepage of the channel and click join for that. But for SMU, this is now the part of practices where you hone in on what your rotations are going to be these first couple weeks. When they get back to Dallas and they play Houston Christian, they can look at, all right, might be an opportunity to empty the bench like they did last year in that blowout win that they had in Ford against whoever it was in the non-conference. But for SMU, they now have a lot to really go over because there's a lot of competition on this team. And I look at what SMU was able to do with its defensive line in the offseason. And as far as takeaways from fall camp, I mean, it doesn't get any more obvious that last year's defensive line was good. This year's defensive line is better. And what will have to happen is they will have to show up against the higher level competition in the ACC. But you look at the size, you look at the athleticism, you look at the depth. SMU's defensive line is just night and day comparatively to the depth of last year's unit. And we've talked a lot about Elijah Roberts, who just looks like an absolute star, and what he's going to be able to bring to the table for SMU's defense this year, not adjusting to a new role. This offensive line that SMU's had is missing Andrew Chambly. They're getting Logan Parr back here soon. They're going to get a better look from that unit a little bit, at least as far as ones, twos, threes, when they add that full depth back. But there's no question that this offense, that this defensive line has really stepped up in a big way. And I think that's where you look at SMU's schedule and you look at the season that they're preparing for, and SMU's over-under is set at 8.5. And I was watching Greg McElroy on one of the ESPN channels, and he was saying that was an overvalued pick for Vegas to set it at 8.5, which is, I don't really have a problem with him saying that because it is such a hard step up. We haven't seen the historical data to show, all right, if you move up from the group of 5, you're going to win above 8 games. You're going to get to 9. You're going to get to 10. But what SMU has in this defensive line will allow this defense to be really special. And I think that's getting slept on in a way because they have the ability with all of the guys that they have to rotate, to move them around, and to really get creative as far as the depth that they have and create more competition and create more production because of that. I mean, if you're watching on YouTube, you've got Big Tank Booker, you've got Big Jonathan Jefferson. Jonathan Jefferson's been one of the biggest movers of fall camp compared to what he came in as to what he is now. You factor in Jared Harrison Hunt at the 3 technique, Mike Lockhart at the 3 technique. Mike can also play a little bit of nose. You've got Corey Roberson back. It's pretty crazy to talk about this defensive line. And when people say, wow, is it really better than last year? they're going to have to show it. And, BYU, TCU are two very good opportunities to show why it is a better group. And FSU and Louisville will be tough, very tough tests, but they'll, over the course of the season, show why they were so talked about in the offseason, and the depth that they put together and the talent that they put together was so important for this team. And it'll allow this defense to make plays, to produce, and cover up maybe some deficiencies or some growing that needs to be done at corner. And when you look at the scrimmage, we weren't allowed in, but just from talking with people that were there, the pressure that SMU's quarterbacks are under is pretty, I think, obvious to those that get to go, that it's hard to judge those quarterbacks. It's hard to judge the offense because the defensive line is that good. And when you get Chamblee back, when you get Logan Parr full go, maybe we see a little bit of a change there, just from being able to have two full lines that are talented enough to go and maybe handle some of these guys a little bit more on the defense. But the defensive line has just made it really hard on SMU in fall camp to get good looks offensively. But the good thing is that iron sharpens iron. And I'll say this, PJ Williams at left tackle has been such a big deal for SMU this offseason. They lost Branson Hickman and Marcus Bryant to the transfer portal. Justin Osborne was an easy plug and play at center. And, I was a big Branson fan coming out of high school. I stuck up for him throughout his career when he was young and kind of getting stronger at the point of attack. And I knew he was going to have a chance to start for SMU, coach's son, wrestler, all those things. Justin Osborne is a far better athlete than Branson, and he's got a lot more of that ability to hold it together at the point of attack, especially in the run game. And you have him at the center position, and you have PJ at left tackle. PJ was the one that people were saying, okay, well, it didn't look that great in the spring, and it, a lot of questions there. I tell you what, he has been the best offensive lineman in fall camp. And, Garen Justice said that as well, meeting with him on Tuesday afternoon, that he has really stepped up. And, getting a sense of how good he's been, it's somewhat hard to do because we're not allowed in too much for a lot of competitive reps between the offense and defense. We get a little bit of team period, and really that's kind of it. I think we've seen one inside run, which if I had it my way, I want to see one-on-ones and I want to see inside run. I could care less about seeing the team tempo period, because the inside run and the one-on-ones, that's where the competitiveness and the physicality really gets going. The team tempo period is kind of a warm-up. But when we've gotten opportunities to see inside run and a little bit maybe of one-on-ones with some of these offensive and defensive linemen, PJ Williams and Elijah Roberts and Jafari Harvey are going at it, and PJ is more than holding his own. And so it's been quite the impressive run for PJ Williams at that left tackle position. And that is kind of, I think, overall, even through the injury to Andrew Chamblee that has kept him out pretty much all of fall camp, that has really helped settle down that offensive line. And it might not be perfect early in the season, and it will need to get Andrew Chamblee back into the fold at right tackle to really solidify that piece. But they're a lot better at the left tackle in the center position than I think they were given credit for in the offseason. And it was more of a question, not as much of a everyone's down on a PJ Williams or a Justin Osborne at center. You had two guys that played a lot of football at those two spots, Marcus Bryant and Branson Hickman, leaving. So you needed PJ, a younger guy, to take the next step. He did that. Justin, you figured, was going to be fine just because anything he's done on the offensive line has worked out. So the offensive and defensive lines, the defensive line has pretty much had zero questions from it and for it. With the whole run of fall camp, the offensive line has faced a little bit more adversity, but the big difference for fall camp, I think, this year compared maybe to last year is we're not going to get a sense of, and I know this is kind of a cop out, but we're not going to get a sense of who's really rolling in this quarterback competition and who's really rolling offensively and at the skill position spots because the defensive line has just controlled practice so much. It's going to take Nevada. It's going to take Houston Christian games to show where SMU's at offensively. And then we can start assessing and taking the stock of these players that we've seen flashes of, but we don't even know how consistent they truly can be because of this defensive line that they have put together. You have Preston Stone and Kevin Jennings who have a lot of experience, and both are very good in their own certain ways. But when you watch them in practice and they're going up against the ones and the twos on defense, it makes it hard to really get a feel for, well, how good can this offense really be? Is this the next step in this team's development? Because they are going up a level in competition. And there were moments last year against better teams where it didn't look as good as it has in the past under Rhett Lashlee with some of the players and offenses he's produced for the Mustangs, again, at the AAC level. But we know that Rhett and his staff can find ways to get things going. They're going to have to build a lot of confidence early, in my opinion, with Preston Stone and Kevin Jennings, because yes, they return pretty much their entire running back room. They added a couple nice pieces in Brashard Smith and Derek McFall. They have their whole wide receiver room back. They have their whole tight end room back and add a Matthew Hibner. And they have all these receivers that are a year older and more mature, and Romello Brinson gained 10 pounds and all of those things. But they really haven't, in my opinion, seen the totality of what having all of those returning players can mean for this team. And that's why I think it's such an interesting dynamic when talking about, to the earlier point of, was SMU's 8.5 wins overvalued, undervalued for this season as far as a preseason win total. That's where it gets interesting because, one, we don't know what the offense is going to do this year. And we know that with Preston and Kevin back, it's make or break for their futures at quarterback at SMU. It is. You're both experienced. You both have played in some big games. You both have gone through another offseason. You have all this talent back. You've got to be ready to roll, but you also have faced quite the challenge in fall camp with this defensive line being as good as it is. So it's hard. And people ask me all the time, well, what do you think about SMU's win total? I've said 8. I think I said 8 on the board. I don't know if I said 9. I said 8 on the podcast with Bill. Bill said 9 when we were introducing the Pony Express case. And that's because you look at this schedule, and we'll do a preseason predictions pod, and I'll kind of run through the schedule and just kind of why I think certain things and all of those things. But if you look at the non-conference schedule, and again, SMU is picked to win 8.5 games, or that's the over-under, so to speak, that is set for SMU this year. If Vegas has them set at 8.5, don't you got to think 4 of those wins come against non-conference foes? Because I look at the back half of the year and I see, all right, Florida State, Louisville, they're going to be tough. They're going to have adversity to overcome in those 2 games against 2 really good teams. Duke won a fair amount last year. They have a totally different program. Pitt, always physical, could bounce back. BC, SMU lost to them last year. Now, they'll get them in Dallas. New coaching staff at BC, all of those things. Stanford, they've been doing some good things. Cal, they've been doing some good things. UVA is the only one that on the schedule really is like, oh, wow, that's a team that really struggled last year. So I would love to know how Vegas was like, all right, 8.5. But then you also have the reality of Rhett Lashlee and his staff haven't beaten Sonny Dykes. And I think last year was super disappointing the way they played, especially after the OU game. And maybe they went all in on OU as far as the emotions, a big chance for SMU, and they came up short and they had to come back and it just didn't pan out for them. But this is the year where that defensive line has a chance to truly get after whoever TCU has at quarterback by that point in the season. they have a chance to catch TCU, obviously at home in Ford Stadium, but also coming off of a game against UCF, I believe. I mean, TCU UCF is the week prior, I think, if I have that right. But this is it's a schedule that tees up SMU well, but SMU hitting that over under is going to depend on this offense because last year we saw moments where SMU's defense against lesser competition was able to just dominate them so much. You think of the East Carolina game. You think of some of those other games that they had. I mean, obviously the offense could roll against Temple, against Charlotte, against some of those other ones, but I think it's all predicated on this offense taking the next step against high level competition. And one of the biggest takeaways for me in fall camp is I don't know how this offense is going to do. I really don't. I think they can be really good. I think the receivers are better, like a Jordan Hudson and a Romello Brinson come to mind of guys who have truly elevated their game. I think Matthew Hibner is a true X factor, being able to maybe do some 2 tight end sets. But until we see it happen, I'm not gonna stand on the table for that. What I'll stand on the table for is SMU is a strong defensive football team, and they have an opportunity to be one of the best defenses in the country once again. Because SMU offensively is not inept. They're not deficient in talent. They have good scheme. They have all of these things going for them, but this defense is still getting their way with them in practice. So I think it's going to be really interesting to see what translates from fall camp to the Saturday games, and we'll see kind of how it goes overall. But fall camp has been kind of a whirlwind for SMU, and I think maybe this is to a final point on fall camp. I think this is the point in the Rhett Lashley era and the overall construction of this football team where we don't have to sit back and wonder, oh gosh, what's going to happen? What's going to, how's this going to go? Whatever. They built this team into a mature, experienced group that has timed up perfectly for this move into the ACC. If you somehow were moving SMU into the ACC in 25, outside of quarterback, you're looking at a really young team potentially, depending on how the portal and everything would go. And at the very least, you're looking at a ton of new faces. Now you have a combination of some new faces at key positions that can really show up and help. And you have a lot of key leaders in that safety room, in that linebacker room, defensive line, some returning players at corner, and a lot of pieces on offense back that have been through a lot and seen a lot last year together going through things. Moochie Dixon playing through his thumb or finger injury. Jordan Hudson co-leading the team in touchdowns, but really not having that big of a role in a way. Romello Brinson flashes. Jake Bailey and Roderick Daniels. Wow, okay, you see some of what they can do, but can they put it all together? Keyshawn Smith continuing to try and find that consistency that he needs to do to be great for this team. Last year, there were so many questions, even as they went through the schedule and, really made a ton of plays and kind of rolled through a lot of that AAC schedule until Memphis and Rice gave them a little bit of a run for their money. East Carolina was obviously early, but they closed for the most part pretty strongly in the AAC, and then obviously beat Tulane in a dominant defensive showing. This year, I don't have as many questions for this team. All I wonder is, how does it translate? And there's no way to know that until we start getting into the BYU and TCU. If those games go as, in my opinion, on paper, they can go for SMU, which, look, BYU was right around bowl eligibility last year. Buzz out of BYU is not anything that's crazy, but they're also physical. They're generally a much older team. They did beat up on SMU a little bit in that bowl game and brought it to them physically. It was still, again, down to the wire, final play decides it. But can you get over that hump? Oklahoma, SMU's game was determined by basically 2 plays. Jalen Knighton fumbling and SMU missing a wide open touchdown pass to Roderick Daniels on the first drive. Pump block, OU scores. There's your difference in the game for the most part. So, same with BC. And that is where SMU could very well go through their schedule and some balls might not roll their way and they might roll the other team's way. And in some games, they might roll SMU's way. But that's where it's going to be even more competitive in this league. And until SMU shows they are the group of 5 team that can move up and get to 8 wins, get to 9 wins, it's going to have to be another show me year for SMU. And they deserve a lot of the buzz they're getting. They're receiving votes in the AP poll. This is still a step up. And for it to go well for SMU, I believe they need to make a bowl. They need to get back to bowling. That would continue to show that things are in the right direction. This team has too much depth. I've said this. They have too much depth. They have too much experience at quarterback. They have too much experience at a lot of key positions coming back. And while it's probably not perfect, they like where they're at in fall camp and really think they have a chance to surprise some people. That's one of the key things that a lot of these players have said in interviews. Ready to shock some people, ready to show them, ready to show the world, and lead SMU into this new era by making a lot of noise that maybe a lot of people wouldn't expect. But you look at the preseason buzz, you look at receiving votes, you look at, the 8.5 win total. And I mean, if you're going to be the program you want to be, this is the year that obviously you knock down some of the Power 5 wins and Power 4 wins or whatever. That's the big thing that has to happen. But you also need to go through and you need to beat a TCU, not even receiving votes unless I completely missed them in the AP poll. BYU, same story. But you know what? SMU preseason ranked as the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7th team in the ACC. And outside of Louisville and Florida State, none of the teams in that group ahead of them are on the schedule. So the schedule shapes up well. So right there, you're looking at basically SMU being, in theory, favored on most of these games that they're facing. And so there is pressure that comes with that. But there's also the reality that until SMU shows that they're able to knock these wins down, there's just going to be that little inkling in the back of your head that's like, wow, all right, will this actually go the way that the AP predicts in terms of, SMU being receiving votes before the season? Will it be like all the computers and ESPN FPI and things like that predict? Because it's a large ask, but so was going undefeated in AAC play last year, and they found a way. So they're probably looking right down the barrel of 8, 9 wins if things go their way. They've got a couple tough games on there. They've got some games that emotionally you've got to be ready to go for, or else you will absolutely get beat. And those are the types of games that will change your season from going bowling and looking like things are really on the rise on the hilltop, which they can still be on the rise, even if they maybe, 5 wins. But like I've said this is a team that, from what I've seen in fall camp, has too much depth, too much talent, too much experience to not go bowling and to not make some noise in the ACC in year one. So we will see how it goes.